there's the shift in the online experience, which you could say that's VR, that's the storytelling I was talking about earlier, like just the appreciation for the fact that you're greeting different types of customers in all of these situations, and one size doesn't necessarily fit all, meaning you have to kind of meet them where they are. That whole mindset is, I think, coming out more in what brands are doing today.
This is the Safari. The Safari is a tour around the consumer, brand, and retailing industry. And we have the great privilege here at my company, Traub, to really be exposed to many of the great minds of the industry who are forming and shaping the future of many different parts of the consumer, brand, and retail world. And I felt it was quite interesting for us to be able to not only learn from all of those people as we do every day, but memorialize it into a podcast, which could then be shared with many of our friends and clients and you, obviously, the listener. Welcome back to the Safari. This is Morty Singer speaking. It is May 2021, and today we are going to be talking about logistics. This is the logistics episode. And, it's just important to get things to people quickly. And increasingly, it's harder and harder with the cost of doing so, but also competition from the likes of Amazon makes it tricky for all kinds of smaller brands to compete. And so Quiet Logistics is a solution to that. And I figured they are some of the best around, if not the best around when it comes to this stuff. And Kate Klemmer Terry is the Chief Revenue Officer of Quiet Logistics. And she's got an incredible background in fashion and retail, having really for 30 years been at the forefront of e-commerce. I mean, she led that function or those functions at Ralph Lauren and Banana Republic, Kate Spade, Coach, Tommy Hilfiger, etc. So some of the biggest names around. And she's going to explain to us how important it is today to make sure that the back of house and all of the plumbing is in place to get all of your incredible products to the consumer on time and maybe quickly. Stick around. Kate, thank you so much for joining me on the Safari.
Thank you for having me here.
So where are you?
Right now I'm sitting in Devens, Massachusetts, which is where our company was originally founded. So I'm visiting our fulfillment center for meetings.
Yes, and we're about to learn a lot about fulfillment centers and fulfillment centers with an S at the end, because I know you have many, and that's part of the magic of what you do. So, Kate, before we go around sort of trying to learn about how to get products to consumers in the 21st century in an efficient and elegant manner, it's important, I think, to start with why someone like you, who has in fact been on the brand side most of her career, suddenly finds herself in the role that you are in as the Chief Revenue Officer of one of the most advanced, technologically driven logistics centers on the planet, and why that makes a difference. So tell us a little bit about your background in prestige retail, and then how you landed where you landed.
So I really started my career on the merchandising side, and then that evolved into the e-commerce side eventually. I always sort of had a penchant for computer sort of sciencey kind of things. And so I worked at Ralph Lauren, I worked at Banana Republic, I worked at a lot of American companies on the merchandising side. And then when the e-commerce piece started to come out, I had actually left Ralph Lauren, but I came back to launch Polo.com. And that was the beginning of e-commerce in my career, which was early on. It was obviously 20 years ago. I think that background of when you're a merchant, first of all, in the old school of merchants, you learn the entire organization, because in the old school, you were kind of the hub and everybody else was sort of, you're kind of responsible for every piece to the puzzle. And then in e-commerce, you're learning all of the supply chain piece as well as other aspects. So that full knowledge really prepared me well for many other iterations of down my career. And then I would say the brands that I worked for were super brand conscious. Tommy Hilfiger, Ralph Lauren, Kate Spade, Coach, like all super brand conscious. And so the combination of all those three things, I think, really leads well into the job I'm in today, is as the Chief Revenue Officer of Quiet. We are taxed with making sure that we're helping our brands grow in a way that's attributable for their brand, right? So what does that look like from a digital experience and from a, fulfillment experience kind of standpoint?
So I remember listening to, what was it, a YouTube video where Marvin was being interviewed by someone in the 90s talking about what he called electronic retailing. And it was sort of, 0.1% of the business, and he thought it was going to be really cool and interesting to follow. And of course, you started at the genesis of e-commerce, and seeing it today compared to what it was then must be kind of mind-blowing for you. Maybe more mind-blowing for those getting into the business today than it is for you, but nonetheless, a fascinating sort of progression, because you were there when none of the plumbing was available. You had to build everything from scratch with your hands, and there was no or few SaaS providers to bolt on and do all kinds of stuff. So what was it like? How were you able to act as a silo within an organization? And were there any things that were better back then that maybe we could learn about today from how you did it when you were doing everything yourself?
So I think the interesting thing is, there was no, there were platforms back then, but the platforms were not anything close to what they are today. Everything today is so much more sort of plug and play, as they like to say, and everything, it makes it, you could be up and running with a brand in days today, as opposed to months and, possibly years in the past. I would say the one downside to that is that because it was such a Wild West, we really did, imagine and create custom things by brand. Whereas today, I think you end up with a lot of one-to-many kind of strategies, like every Shopify website kind of looks a little similar because you end up, utilizing these very fast to market kind of capabilities. I would say totally what you would expect from Ralph Lauren, we were very big into storytelling back then. And that was a big part of our website. And how do we really expose that kind of key to Ralph's brand of storytelling? And we did things back then that, I actually wrote something to David Lauren recently to say we were way ahead of our time because we had 3D shops that, was all, I can't even remember what the technology was called, but it was all like you could click on a shirt in a general store and it would pop up. And so that type of storytelling, I think, is really important in e-commerce. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of brands got away from it. And now I see it coming back, which is exciting. It's an exciting shift because it's so necessary. You're not really optimized for all the different types of customers if you don't have some sort of push selling going on, I don't think.
Yeah. And so today, in this, you referenced the Shopify universe, and there seems to be these two sort of dueling ecosystems. There's the Amazon world, and then there's the Shopify world. And obviously, you really help brands that predominantly, at least in your origins, dealing with digital native brands who either use Shopify or something akin to that. You're trying to get them to be as powerful, maybe from a sort of cooperative perspective, all of their plumbing being provided by you, to be able to really compete with the Amazons of the world and really trying to get things to people not only quickly but efficiently, and then I think it's what's equally important, gracefully. Can you try and explain what Quiet Logistics does, how you do it, and I think most importantly that sort of human touch that is not just a touch, it's kind of a stamp once the robots have done what they have to do, because it's really fascinating. And tell us about Quiet Logistics and what the secret sauce is.
Well, I want to make a comparison first with the Amazon point that you made too. I think the biggest difference is people use Amazon as obviously as a marketplace and for exposure, and it's not necessarily where you would go to get your brand sort of fully in. And obviously, the way they fulfill is not brand centric. As the people that would choose someone like us or 3PF is more interested in that interaction of the actual parcel that comes to the customer. That's the first, when you think about these digitally native brands that we started with, that's the first physical interaction you have with that brand. And so that has to be an amazing experience. And so that's one of the things that Quiet has always done well, is not shied away from doing those custom, interesting, beautiful things that make that unveiling so beautiful. Handwritten notes, special stickers, custom branded packaging, whatever the client asked for. And so to that point, to get to your robots, one of the things we realize as labor prices increase, which they have dramatically in the last few years, but definitely over our 12-year history, you have to get efficiencies out of the building in other ways. And so a lot of companies have realized that robotics is a way to do that. And it's not necessarily, in our world, it's definitely not to replace the people, but it's to have the things that are not value added for a human to do, like walk around a building. I mean, unless they're trying to just get their steps up for the day, there's not a lot of value in a human walking 3 or 4 miles to pick orders, as opposed to letting a robot do that, and then letting a robot do things that it's also more capable of computing, the best path to go and things like that. That leaves our labor open for doing all of these custom sort of value-added services that we excel at. I would say we do hand stamping of the luggage tags for one of our clients with gold foil. We do, there's some refurbishing we do for returns that was like you dress shirts getting put back into their package with all the little you would never know whatever came out of the package. So there's things like that only a human could do. Yep. And you really need that special attention. So I think that's the balance for us.
Yeah. And there's also a secret sauce, I think, which has got something to do with the last mile. I mean, you're building these facilities, I believe, quite close to the epicenter of the most dense urban populations. Mm-hmm. Vertical, I think, is one of the big things, and therefore these robots aren't just going around and around, but they're going up and down as well. And then, but also the fact that you have, I'm assuming, the inventory of all of these brands spread around the different cities where their customers happen to be. How do you interface with a brand to do the planning and allocation of that inventory? And I'm sure that's probably a thing that you help them with because of your background. But how do you say, look, we have a dozen, 20 locations in the United States, whatever it is today. We're going to parse your inventory by item, by SKU, by collection, whatever it is. And we're going to put it in these different locations based on the data that I'm assuming they give you, those brands.
Yeah. So to that point, we have 8 locations now that are spread all over the U.S. And purposefully in urban locations to take advantage of the fact that we feel the whole industry is moving towards a delivery model that is more, is way faster time to customer. So what we call click to door, mm-hmm. right? So when I finish my placing my order online and how fast it gets to the customer's door, it's also saving a lot of money in terms of freight, because you're paying to send one big box of inventory to our warehouse and then it's in market, so to speak, and get to the end customer for a lot less money. And same day is another piece to that we are exploring. So how do we do that? You are absolutely correct that this was when I started, I said, well, the first thing you're going to run into is resistance from clients, because they're not going to want to split their inventory. In their heads, they will assume this means they have to carry more, and which is really definitely not the case. And so what we've been doing with the clients that we've had for a long time, who we feel are ripe for this opportunity to split their inventory, we are giving them a tremendous amount of analysis around their sales and their inventory, and what makes a good product line, what makes a good product line to do this type of a splitting. And it has to do with the velocity of SKUs and the correlation between SKUs, and how often they're selling more than one unit per order, and that kind of thing. And that's the analysis that we're ingesting and understanding ourselves, and then figuring out for our clients. So we have a team in business development that are actually planners by trade, and that's exactly why we hired them, is so that they can help out with this piece for sure.
And so originally, the digital native brands found you as a very graceful solution for them. On the one hand, because they were small companies and didn't have any of this plumbing, but also I think your attention to detail, and these young digital native brands, they all think they're Louis Vuitton or Chanel, and that's fine, and that's good for them. But so your attention to that detail made them I think comfortable. What do you think is sort of the next progression here? Because evidently you have many of those kinds of brands as your foundational clients, but I think you're probably finding bigger brands saying, we like that stuff too. And I guess many larger Goliaths maybe are sort of knocking on your door with the hopes of having the same kind of service, I suppose.
Yes. So definitely, there are big brands that are realizing they need these in-market nodes just as much as the tiny guys. And for them, they're keeping their main centralized hub, if you will, and we become the spokes. And so they wouldn't put all 100,000 SKUs that they may have in our building, but they put 15, 20, whatever the top 15 or 20,000 are, based on analysis that they do, around the allocation of that. It helps them also with their stores, so that then that's a centralized, truly virtual inventory for stores and for e-commerce sitting in market. So I can replenish my store super fast, as well as, solve the direct to consumer piece. So yeah, that's a big piece of our growth as well, is those larger brands.
I want to take a second to explain to you why Traub is able to bring you the safari. We pride ourselves in being at the very center of a very global, very complicated consumer and retail landscape. And in our travels, as we help think, manage, and expand businesses in many different channels and geographies, we're able to meet and learn from some of the great minds in this industry. And it's really wonderful to be able to bring them to you. And in doing so, I hope that you, the listener, will be able to learn a little bit more about what we do at Traub as well. Back to the safari. And so what's sort of one of the biggest hurdles for young brands to scale, and how does Quiet really provide that sort of much needed data monitoring, shipping, fulfillment services?
I think one of the biggest there's two big challenges for them. One is how high is high, which is like what we always used to say as merchants, but how high is high? They don't know how to, the forecasting piece is not necessarily their skill set. Most of the brands that we've met along the years, they've come out of marketing or design or a creative side of the business. They very rarely come out of the supply chain side and the planning side. So the forecasting piece is always a challenge, and knowing how much inventory to carry. And so that's obviously a challenge for us. We don't really want to be in the business of storage. We want to be in the business of outbound, to my earlier point. So for us, the challenge for them is really how to help them do their inventory analysis, like I was just saying, and how do we make sure that we're on top of what they're, inbounding, and making sure that it's all productive. And at the same time, this is the second challenge, is the disposition of inventory. The bigger brands have gotten over that hump, and they're fine with sending stuff to TJ Maxx or whoever. But these littler brands are very brand conscious. And that's a challenge we saw, is that, oh my gosh, they don't have anywhere that they feel comfortable getting rid of this product. So one of our initiatives this year is to come up with which I think we talked about, is to come up with a disposition, sort of like a 2-day a year sample sale kind of a website, where we could help our brands in a closed kind of environment dispose of inventory that's no longer saleable.
Yeah. And so you're dealing with, obviously these, let's say mid-sized companies, and now some larger guys that are coming and knocking on your door, but you also have an incubator program for very small companies. What does that look like? Because I'm sure there are many people who would love to work with you, but feel that they shouldn't approach you because they're too small in their minds. What is that incubator program?
We look at, we have a screening process on our website and other places that you interact with us in LinkedIn and whatnot that does ask kind of the size of you. And then when you're in that incubator status, we do try to get a few pieces of information to see whether you're the right fit for an incubator. What we're looking for is someone that has a unique proposition, does have the right talent internally. There's a few little bellwethers that we look for. And then we think it's worthwhile to have somebody in that program. So all that program really means is that we give you a little leeway to figure out your growth. We're a little more relaxed on certain requirements that we have for the bigger brands, just because we want to make sure that we're giving you the opportunity to grow. But you do have a measurement period, and so if we provide all the best practices of what all the other clients are doing. So it's a learning experience for them, as well as hopefully a good proving ground. I mean, thankfully, we've had some brands away luggage. I think we shipped their first piece of luggage. There's quite a few brands that we have now that are very large that we did their first few units. So it's worked.
So speaking of learning experiences, I would assume that a brand that works with you learns more than they might expect from the data that you capture, and which might even inform future merchandising decisions, indeed even product development, because they find out from the way they've been able to work with you that in such and such a area of the country, let's say the Southeast, actually this product worked incredibly well, and because it was able to get to them in one day or whatever, it informed a decision-making process. I mean, do you see, or do you provide data back to the merchants of the brands to help them identify? I think back to the My Macy's way of looking at the world of 69 regions and trying to pass out different bits of information around to inform buying decisions.
Right, the hot store strategy. Yeah, exactly. So today we don't necessarily give them back specific information around the product itself, because we don't have a lot of attributing in our system, which I think would really lend itself to that. But we are talking about how can we aggregate information for them across all our brands. So obviously they have to all agree to that, but that gives them more information on buying patterns in different locations and correlations between things. That's definitely a piece that we feel like even customer analysis, where we can be showing them the overlap between other brands that we have, and are there potential marketing opportunities between the two, because they do share a common end customer. So there's definitely a lot to be learned from the analysis we have.
Yeah. So moving on to maybe the industry more broadly, and given your vantage point of 3 decades focusing on this part of the business, and you actually started this conversation talking a little bit about being ahead of the times, trying to meld content with commerce and making the online experience as much as possible like the in-store experience. Where are you seeing things going? I mean, this is blue sky. Where, as an industry expert and having been at the forefront of all this, where do you see commerce going? Is it going into headsets? Is it going into VR, AR? Is it omni-channel going to have a huge amount of top spin that that you're feeling and seeing that we may not have seen yet? What are some of the things that are exciting you?
I would say there's probably 3 main buckets of that. There's the shift in the online experience, which you could say that's VR, that's the storytelling I was talking about earlier, like just the appreciation for the fact that you're greeting different types of customers in all of these situations, and one size doesn't necessarily fit all, meaning you have to kind of meet them where they are. That whole mindset is, I think, coming out more in what brands are doing today. I would say the other piece is the whole delivery side of things, and not just what I was saying about the same day and the next day, but just the more innovative idea around how am I utilizing my stores or that whole omni-channel experience, and what does the store experience really do to the online experience? I think companies really dabbled in it before, but truly most companies that were omni-channel, retail still ruled the roost, because that was where the footprint was, that's where a lot of the investment was, and the e-commerce was the tail wagging the dog. Today, obviously, given the last year we've had, that power sort of shifted a little bit, in which case now I think brands have to address it, and they have to figure out really what does really that. I'm agnostic as to where you buy that product, truly. And so what's the best experience for the customer, and how does that play through every single step of the customer's journey? I think there's lots of brands that still haven't figured that out, and that's got to be a shift for survival.
And so in luxury, they say that the industry wisdom is that 40% of the business will end up being done online, if not in some parts of luxury, 50% of the business done online. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's actually realistic, or do you think there might be a whiplash to physical, to stores, to experiential that could happen?
It could be 50%. I think some of that has to do with a little bit like how you penetrate geographically, right? So that is sort of the key for the growth of Net-a-Porter and some of these other brands, is there's just the physical retail isn't in the geography that the customer is in. But I also think that as we make it easier to understand what product is and to feel the same experience and to get the services the same online as offline, then there's no doubt that it could be 50% for sure. I don't think that means that stores don't need to be there, because there's still a tremendous amount of customers, like what I was just saying. There's a lot of customers who still love the discovery. And the discovery, honestly, in a store is still to this day a little more fun than the discovery, especially for luxury products, where it's all about the color and the hand and the feel. Like that, you can't touch, unfortunately, online right now. So I still think that stores have a very important purpose in this whole thing.
And just, I know you guys are focused on, for the time being, on North America, but again, with your history in the space, how would you advise a brand trying to figure out the global e-commerce nut? Because obviously there are marketplaces, there are cross-border partnerships, and there's obviously going it alone, going it with someone else. There's Farfetch. There's all these different people saying, "Hey, we want your margin." And what would be your sort of 3 bullets of advice to an entrepreneur, trying to figure out that big nut?
I would say to go into Europe or into Asia, obviously having somebody, those are very different markets. I mean, I had the pleasure of living in Amsterdam when I worked for Tommy and running the European business in addition to the US. So I kind of see how totally way more complex that is than what we deal with in the US. And I think having a partner in that for a brand is super important. Today, as I said, similar to what we were talking about before, the plug and play nature of things, you could hook up with an international provider of things very quickly, very easily to get into an international market, but you may not actually do it correctly, right? You may not know how to optimize that. So then what you're referencing, like with Farfetch and these other marketplaces that are luxurious marketplaces, are the perfect partner. It gives you the exposure that you need. That margin that you give up is actually totally worth it for what you learn from them. And that's a great initial springboard into getting into those markets, I think.
And as we sort of get to the top of our time, any final thoughts on what's exciting to you about the industry this year as we come out of the pandemic or beyond?
I think a lot, the sheer number of innovative brands that are just coming out of the woodwork. I mean, we see them a lot because obviously they come to us, to hopefully be in our buildings, but it's mind-boggling. There's just so many very cool, innovative brands. And I think the fact that they're able to have this brand aesthetic that's affordable yet chic, and it's sustainable and yet luxurious. Like, they've learned how to combine all the attributes together. It's customized, and yet it's in some ways one to many. So there's a lot of things they've been able to do, and in a nimble way that I think is, going to springboard their growth, where those larger brands maybe are a little bit too much of a very large ship that's not going to move fast enough. And I think that's what's super interesting.
Well, there's indeed a huge amount of innovation out there, including Quiet Logistics, quiet in the background, doing what you do to support all these people. Kate Klemmer Terry, Chief Revenue Officer of Quiet Logistics, thank you so much for doing the safari with me.
Thank you.
If you want to learn a little bit more about Traub, you can go to traub.io, where you'll learn a lot about everything that we do. If you're enjoying the safari, please do share it with your friends and colleagues within the industry. And please also don't forget to subscribe and like it. Until next time.